Hey y'all, it's Ashley at Bookishrealm and I'm back with another video. As you can see, this is my October wrap up, which it's not spooky at all. I didn't read anything spooky in October, but I did read quite a few good books, so I'm excited to talk about those books. Please excuse like some weird like wheezing that you may hear. I've been sick, so that means that my asthma has been flaring up. And I've been using my inhaler, but it still has kind of like a lingering effect. So if I'm a little short on breath or whatever, just bear with me. So before we get started talking about the books, I want to talk a little bit about Book of the Month. So thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. So if you didn't know, Book of the Month is a super popular and fast growing online book service. Their mission is to help readers discover new books that they love while also promoting new and emerging authors. The way that it works is pretty cool, is that the Book of the Month team spends time vetting through hundreds of books to come up with a specially curated list of books for you to choose from. That way you can spend less time researching and more time reading. And if you're anything like me, time is of the essence, okay? I am short on time, so it's beneficial when somebody can come up with a curated list of books for me to choose from. One of the awesome things about this curated list is that it contains a combination of newly and early release titles, so we do get the opportunity sometimes to read titles before they're actually released. And one of my favorite things about Book of the Month is that they have worked really hard to not only promote authors from different backgrounds to highlight diversity of their authors, but they also have a wide variety of genres for people to choose from. So there are books that are thrillers, there's mysteries, there's historical fiction, there's fantasies, there's nonfiction. It's just a little bit of something for everyone to kind of select from. Book of the Month is also risk-free. They have a skip policy, so if there's ever a month where you see a selection, you're like, I don't know if I want anything for this month, you can skip that month and you will not be charged for that month. In addition, Book of the Month has the best prices for newly released hardcovers. If you're like me, falling on a budget, you know that newly released hardcover, especially adult titles, are pretty expensive. We're talking anywhere from $28 in US dollars, $28 US and upward, and that's pretty expensive. But today you can use my code Bookishrealm and get your first book for $9.99. So I'll make sure that I leave that code and the link to the Book of the Month website down in the description box for you below, so you can go ahead and check those things out. So every month your books are going to come in this blue Book of the Month box. So let's go ahead and check out this month's selections. The first book that I see here is The Family, and this is a novel about two girls who have been best friends since birth. They are connected by the fact that they live close to each other and this kind of elusive community that their fathers run called The Family. Well, one of the girls, like her father, goes missing, and it causes a strain between their relationship. As they get older, they become wives, you know, activists in their own communities, and it is one specific night that their loyalty to each other and to the family overall is going to be tested. I believe that this book takes place in Brooklyn, and this, I think, is going to be interesting. I wonder if this is going to have any type of like organized crime type of vibe to it. I'm not sure if it will or if it won't, but I'm interested in knowing if that's going to be the case, because it definitely will make this book even more intriguing. The next one that I have here is The Collective, and this is one that I am super excited to pick up, and the kind of subtext below the title is No Killer Goes Unpunished. So this book is about a woman by the name of Camille, and her daughter ends up dead, and this takes place 5 years after her daughter's death, and she believes that there is a young man who in a place of privilege who is responsible for her daughter's death. So she starts doing some pretty crazy things, and then she draws in the attention of The Collective, and they are a group of women who have also suffered different losses due to the privilege of men. So in order to get their own retribution, because the justice system is not working in their favor, they organize these highly precise murders. So then it's up to Camille to decide, are these women really like true, you know, like angels in disguise, holding these people accountable for what they've done, or are they monsters? And I love a messy story involving moms, probably because I am a mom, but I think that this one is one that I'm gonna eat up, because I couldn't imagine what I would do if I was in Camille's shoes with my own daughter. So I'm super excited for this. The next one is A Little Hope, and this one seems to be a book that's going to really heavily focus on community, family, and friendships. It primarily starts off with focusing on two men who have a daughter who feel like they have this great bond. They're really secure in their relationship and their family dynamic, and one of them gets, you know, diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and then everything seems to fall apart after that. And then it talks about other people in the community who may be experiencing similar things. The next one is a fantasy, and this is The Keeper of Night, and this is about a young woman who is actually, and I'm going to make sure I get the name right, she's a Shinigami, and this is a Japanese god of death. She's half British, half Japanese, and she ends up in a situation where she gets driven out of London, ends up in Japan, and she becomes the goddess of death. And while there, she takes on this task to eliminate 3 powerful demons, and it's probably a task where she's bitten off more than she can chew. But this is one that piqued my interest, because the most experience that I have with knowing a lot about Japanese gods of death is from Death Note. And I'm not saying that this is giving me Death Note vibes, but I think it'd be interesting to get another take, another perspective on it, and I just absolutely adore and love this cover. The next one that I have here is How to Marry Keanu Reeves in 90 Days by K.M. Jackson, and I've actually seen this one around a lot. This one focuses on a woman by the name of Lou who's kind of obsessed with Keanu Reeves, and she finds out that he's getting married in 90 days. So she makes it her mission to either have him like cancel the wedding or marry her or something, so the hopes of other women getting the opportunity to marry him or be with him is kept alive. So she enlists the help of her friend True, and he clearly has a huge crush on her, doesn't know why he's, you know, willing to do this, but it's gonna come down to Lou, you know, either really trying to fight for Keanu or realizing that maybe the man that she's always needed in her life has been there the entire time. I think this one also has like an older character in it, but I'm like an older heroine in it, so definitely excited to pick up this one, which feels more like a contemporary romance. Another thing that I wanted to highlight is that Book of the Month does have add-ons. So when you make your Book of the Month selection for the month, you do get the opportunity to select from other books, where you can add on up to 2 books to get shipped to you. I have 2 here. The first one being Will, which is a autobiography that Will Smith has written. I think that this one is absolutely beautiful. And the other one is My Body, and this one is an exploration of feminism, sexuality, and how men treat and view women, and how women end up accepting this treatment. So I think this is another one that's probably going to be like super intriguing, especially since I've been reading a lot of books about feminism through different lenses. All right, y'all, like I said before, I will make sure that I leave the code, which is Bookishrealm, and the link to Book of the Month down in the description box below. And thank you so much to Book of the Month for sponsoring this video. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the books that I ended up reading in the month of October. I can't believe I was about to forget what month we're in. It's a lot. And I have to watch my breathing because I'm still a little under the weather. And I think that when I talk too much, I get a little out of breath because I have asthma and I have a chest cold. So that's not too great. So I am almost caught up on all the reviews that I need to do dating back from September and October. I think there's only one book in October that I have not officially written a Goodreads review for. So all these books that I'm going to talk about, I do have Goodreads reviews up and ready to go, except for this first one, because it's going to take me a second to kind of get my thoughts together about this one, and you'll see why. Okay, so the first book that I ended up finishing in October was Rage by Bob Woodward. This is his second book about the Trump administration. The first book that he published about Trump was Fury, and I read that one last year, and I did enjoy it, but I ended up liking Fury more. So basically what ends up happening is I ended up liking Fury more. I mean, I ended up liking Rage more. So what ends up happening is at the end of Fury, we are probably about the point right before the probe into the whole Russian collusion thing goes on. So that picks up in Rage. And in Rage, we get a deeper analysis of what has happened in terms of Trump's COVID response, in terms of how he treated his Secretary of State. So this book is interesting for a couple of reasons. The first half of the book really does heavily delve into what his treatment of his Secretary of State was, and that was General Mattis, I believe. And if I got his name wrong, I'll make sure I correct it on the screen. But they had a very intriguing relationship, and Bob Woodward spends a good portion of the first half of the book kind of going through that relationship because it directly related to how Trump responded to foreign affairs. There's this interesting thing about Trump not being able to take accountability for his actions and wanting to be seen as the best for everything, and his obsession with social media. And I think that what Woodward was doing here was showing how close we were running into some issues with North Korea and China and Russia during, I think it was about 2017, and the American public wasn't really aware of what was going on. I think the other interesting aspect of this book is that he was able to sit down and interview Trump, or at least talk to Trump, because I think a couple of the interviews were actually via phone conversations. He was able to sit down with him about how many different times? 17 times. So in the first book, Fury, we don't get any dialogue between Bob Woodward and Trump. So everything is really based upon whatever he has researched with interviews with other individuals. Not saying that this book isn't, but now we have these first account narratives from Trump himself. All of these conversations were recorded, and it was because Trump had refused initially to sit down with him for Fury. With Rage, I believe that it was, I can't remember what senator convinced him. Oh, it was Senator Lindsey Graham, of course, convinced him to sit down with Bob and told him basically that Bob was going to give the most fair representation of his administration and go by facts and not his personal feelings. And honestly, you can see that a lot in the conversations that they have. I think that with media right now being extremely biased either way, you can kind of tell what direction media outlets kind of shift to, whether they shift to the left or the right. It was very interesting seeing someone kind of have a conversation with him and it not be kind of pushy in the sense that I'm trying to vouch for one side or the other. I'm literally trying to get the information from you, and how you paint yourself as a sitting president is how you paint yourself. And the reason why I really do trust Bob Woodward's analysis of Trump and his documentation of the Trump administration is because of the fact that this is what this man does. He has had conversations or has sat down with every sitting president since Nixon. Of course, he was responsible for breaking the Watergate scandal during Nixon's presidency. He didn't actually sit down with him, but he has sat down with every president after. And so this is what he does. And I think that he gave the most fair and most accurate representation that he could based off of what Trump had given him. And it was fascinating just to hear exactly the mindset that Trump had when we were getting into those first stages of the COVID response, and his just lack of awareness. And at a lot of points it made me wonder if he literally was not like he literally had no awareness. He just lacked the intellect to really grasp what was going on, and just has this mental thing going on where he's just determined to be seen as successful and doesn't really see the red flags in certain situations, and doesn't really see the mistakes that he's made as a sitting president. And I'm going to preface this also by saying that, you know, every sitting president makes mistakes. Obama has made a lot of mistakes. Bush has made mistakes. Clinton has made mistakes. They all make mistakes. It is human nature to make mistakes. And I think sometimes when you're in that position of power, it's very difficult to admit. But I think that a great portion of them have admitted when they've made mistakes. But I think that's Trump's biggest hang up, is that he can't come to grips with the fact that he has been wrong. And he's made decisions that just don't necessarily add up, and he doesn't want to take accountability for his actions. And it's very childlike in nature, which makes this read even more interesting. I do have myself on the holds list on my Libby app for the next book, which is Peril. And Peril is a close analysis of like the election and the transfer of power between Trump and Biden. So I'm really enjoying just listening to Bob Woodward's like narratives, especially the ones that closely look at Trump. I'm thinking what I may do is I may go back and do some retro type of reading of stuff that he has done in the past, which I think might be interesting because I have some thoughts about some certain presidents, most particularly Reagan. And I know a couple things about Reagan's administration that really rubbed me the wrong way, but I really would like to know more about him in like totality, because I think still to this day he is the president that has left his administration with the highest approval rating, which if you know any history about Reagan and the war on drugs, that's interesting. Okay, so the next three things that I ended up reading were pretty interesting because these were all specifically like related to Ellen Hopkins. I had went through a severe reading slump in September. I just had a lot going on in September, not necessarily bad things, but I just had a lot going on in September in terms of what I was doing in my personal life, work life, whatever. So I just got really, really busy and I really wasn't reading that much. And then I went on Hoopla and I was like, I just want something to listen to while I'm working to keep myself kind of like engaged. And I was like, you know what? I have not read Ellen Hopkins in a very, very long time. And I probably should say that I ended up giving, I always forget to do this. I ended up giving Rage 4 stars. Sorry, y'all. So I ended up making the decision to reread some of Ellen Hopkins' books. Some of them are newer. I think what I'm going to do, I talked about this on an Insta story a while ago, is I think I'm going to work my way through all of her stuff and kind of do kind of like an author maybe analysis or like an author taste or something, ranking her books. I don't know. But she writes some very, very intriguing books. They are often classified or categorized as YA or teen fiction. They're very hard-hitting, full of content warnings, and they often tackle very, very dark and deep issues. So I ended up finishing 3 of her books, and these books are rather large, but they are all written in verse, so they're really, really easy to make it through, but they all sit at 500 plus pages. So I reread one that I had read a long time ago. We're talking, how old am I? 30? Probably like 10, if not more years ago. And I ended up reading 2, which one of these is probably her most well-known title that I had not read before, that are part of a trilogy. So the first 2, I'm going to talk about the first one. These 2 are a part of a trilogy. The first one that I ended up reading was Crank. And Crank is semi-autobiographical. It's a fictionalized account of Ellen Hopkins' own experience with her daughter's addiction to crystal meth. I knew that going into it. However, I don't think that there's anything that can really prepare you for reading this book. I think even knowing the fact that it's going to deal with hardcore drug addiction is not enough. This book has a lot of content warnings, which I'm going to do a better job about writing the content warnings down. But just so you know, and I kind of included this on my Goodreads review, make sure you're aware of the fact that it is drug use on the page. You're getting a play-by-play of someone's descent into addiction. There is on the page rape, so it's a lot, and it's not an easy book, but it is a powerful book that she was able to translate such a dark and heavy experience into free verse and it be that impactful. So like I said, it focuses on a young girl by the name of Christina. And Christina is good girl, gets good grades, and I think for the most part she's very shy, doesn't have as much self-confidence, and she ends up going to visit her dad, who for the most part has been rather absent. It's not really doing well with his life. He's battling addiction himself, and that's when she gets introduced to, you know, drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and she gets hooked on crystal meth. And she comes back home and she struggles with trying to hide her addiction, and it becomes apparent to her family that there is something going on there. I think a thing that kind of resonated with me was, even though it was from Christina's perspective, we did get to see how her mother interacted. And as a parent myself now, it's one of those things where you're like, what do you do? I have had this conversation with someone where you can raise your kids to do all the right things, teach them right from wrong, but sometimes outside influences change that. And how do you cope with that as a parent? Like, what do you do? How do you protect your child so stuff like this doesn't happen? And I felt for her mother in that way, and I felt for Christina. It's hard watching someone who is so seemingly put together completely fall apart because of addiction. And I think that Ellen Hopkins is something really interesting with her, because she creates this split personality. So you have Christina, and then Christina has this alter ego named Bree, and Bree is the one who keeps up the addiction. Bree is the one who has the confidence to do whatever she needs to do, whether that is sexual or not, to get the drugs that she needs. And it puts Bree and puts Christina in some pretty precarious situations. And at its core, I mean, it can be read as a cautionary tale of, you know, this is what happens when you try crystal meth, or, you know, you try crack, or you try cocaine, whatever the drug is. It is also a clear indication that at its core, addiction is a substance abuse disorder. It is a mental illness. And you can see that in Christina. It is a uphill battle for her. She knows that she should not be doing this. She knows that she should be clean, but she just can't fight it. So I won't say that I enjoyed my read. I feel like it was a very impactful read because the way that Ellen Hopkins was able to weave the story together, but it was not an easy read, and I don't anticipate anybody really taking this as an easy read, but I ended up giving this first one 4 stars. Now, when I say that Christina realizes that she's having an uphill battle, this is very, very apparent in the second book, which is Glass. And I am trying to be mindful about how I talk about Glass, because there is something that happens in Crank that directly impacts how Glass is written and what happens in Glass. So without spoiling and tiptoeing it, there are some things that happen. Christina knows that she needs to stay clean. However, without the appropriate treatment plan, working with doctors, working with the appropriate people, and her going to a treatment center, it doesn't matter what some people may think may be a motivation for them to stop doing drugs. It's not enough. They need that professional help. So I think her family and Christina herself felt like this factor would be able to help her change her life, and it really didn't make a difference. And I think in this book, Christina is a little bit more infuriating. I, just read through some reviews after I finished writing my review, and I found that a lot of people just could not relate to her as much, or the empathy started to lessen because the decisions that she made were just horrible. I mean, she endangered a lot of people. She completely just could not think straight about anything. And while it's human nature, I think that impulse is to be like, oh man, honestly, at the end of the day, I really just can't feel anything for her because she's making her bed, she needs to lay in it. That is a clear sign of someone's personality and mind that has been altered due to addiction. The addiction has its full grasp around her. Christina calls it the monster, and in truth, it is a monster. She cannot control this addiction, and it becomes this huge, I mean huge thing by the time you make it into this second book. And Christina does do some pretty wild things. She does some extremely wild things that it's going to be off-putting. So I had prefaced my review for this one as well by saying, like, if you do decide to pick up this trilogy, don't go into this second book thinking there's going to be some atonement for what happened in the first book. If anything, things get progressively worse in the second book. And I only rated this one 3.5 stars, and I feel like that was because I wanted to see more family engagement. I know her family had their reasons for doing what they were doing, but the way it was written, it was almost like they threw in the towel so quickly. And I don't know, because I have never had to be a support system for someone who's been battling addiction. I have had someone in my life that I think had addiction issues, and I walked away from that situation because of that, and a plethora of other things, and they were never formally, diagnosed as having addiction, but there was just certain things that looked like it could be addiction, or it was leading up to addiction. And so I've never served as a support system, or have been in a position where, like, it is a direct family member who has an addiction issue, and I am trying to help them navigate that and get them help. So for me, it kind of did read a little bit like, are we giving up a little too much? Are we just kind of like assuming that this factor that's here in this present moment is going to make her stop her addiction? Or do we really need to consider probably doing some type of intervention and getting her some type of help? So that was kind of a little off-putting to me, so I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. Now, what's going to be super interesting about this entire series is that the third one, I can't remember what the third book is called. I will put a picture right here, but the third book is actually not written in Christina's perspective. It's written in perspectives of other individuals, so I'm definitely looking forward to reading that one. The next Ellen Hopkins book that I ended up reading was Burned, and this is the one that I reread. I had read this one a long time ago, and I think that it was one of the first Ellen Hopkins books that I had ever read, and it was shocking to read the book because Burned is not a book that you go into reading thinking that you're going to get a happy ending. I think that none of Ellen Hopkins' books, to my understanding and what I've read thus far in the past and now, none of them are happy endings. And I'm not saying that they're all cautionary tales, but they're not ones where you go in looking for things to be tied up nicely, neatly. This is definitely one of those books where it's like, dang, it's rough. I also want to add that I did read through a couple of reviews, because this book does put the main character, Patty, in Mormon religion, and I know that there are some members or people who are practicing Mormons who felt like their religion wasn't accurately represented and that Ellen Hopkins didn't do enough research. I can't contest that because I am not a practicing Mormon. I don't actually know much about Mormon faith. I do believe that this book was not a criticism of Mormons. It was a criticism of institutions that we raise our children in and how they can positively or negatively affect our children. And that the whole idea, I think, of religion, regardless of what your practice in faith is, does not mean that everyone who's a part of that group is good. I think that's what she was going for. And it definitely is more about a young woman trying to find herself growing up in such a strict and structured household that doesn't give her the opportunity to figure out who she is and who she wants to be. So the book itself focuses on, like I said, Patty. And Patty grows up in this strict household, content warnings for abuse in this book. And she is very much so trying to figure out her sexuality. She ends up having a sex dream for the first time, and she doesn't really know, like what it means. She doesn't understand what sex is supposed to be because she's been taught very strict standards about sex. So a couple of things end up happening, and Patty ends up getting sent to her aunt. And Patty grows up in a household where she's not shown love by her mother or her father. She doesn't know what it's like to be loved or to be cared for or wanted. She is basically seen as someone to help out in the household, help take care of the rest of the kids. And so when she gets to her aunt's house, she gets a completely different taste of what it's like to be around people that she loves, and people who love her in turn, people who want her around, people who want to care for her, people who appreciate her. And when she has to go back, of course, she carries that mindset with her, and it gets her into a crazy amount of issues with her family. And it ends tragically, and it's super sad, y'all. I can't really say much about this book because so many pieces and parts of it are important to the conclusion of the book, and I don't want to give any of that away, because I could say one or two things and think, oh, I'm not really spoiling it, and really I could potentially be spoiling it. But once again, not one of those books that I say that I enjoyed. It was what it was, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, it was what it was, and it, once again, a book written in verse that was very powerful in nature, and I ended up giving that one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading was Res Dogs by Joseph Bruchac. This is one that I had recently talked about in my Native American Indigenous recommendations for Native American Heritage Month, a book that you could possibly read for in Digithon. And this is my 3rd or 4th book by Joseph Bruchac, and I really enjoyed it. It's short, it's written in verse. I ended up listening to it on audio because I got the audio from the library, and it's a book that takes place during the pandemic. It's about a young girl who ends up going to the res to quarantine with her grandparents. They're all part of the Wabanaki Nation, and she basically has the opportunity to not only learn about the importance of res dogs, but there is this part of the book that specifically talks about Native American Indigenous history. So what I like that Joseph Bruchac does with this book is it is a combination of things that are happening presently and things that have happened in the past. And it very much so is looking at how certain things, certain events shape groups of people. So for this one, in the present time, we're looking at, of course, the impact of the pandemic and how it has specifically impacted Native and Indigenous communities. There's a conversation about the Black Lives Matter movement, but in terms of past events, Bruchac goes into the impact of residential schools, the impact of forced sterilization, the impact of the removal of Native American Indigenous children from their homes. And I think what I appreciate about this book a lot, it's one that can be read as kind of like an introductory piece into different parts of Native American Indigenous history. I think that a lot of what he talks about is not stuff that's taught in school. So a lot of children, a lot of middle grade age kids reading this book will have not ever heard of a lot of these things. And what's a bonus about this is a lot of adults who may pick up these books with their children if they decide to read them together or do it as a read aloud. They too probably have not heard of a lot of these events and how they have shaped and impacted Native American and Indigenous communities. So it was a very interesting and concise way of introducing people to small bits of history that have had a huge impact that are not often discussed. So I really like that. I would recommend listening to an audio because Joseph Bruchac does read it, and it had an oral storytelling feel to it. So it literally felt like I was sitting in a room with Bruchac and he was literally just telling me a story. It didn't feel so much like an audio book, but this is a oral tradition that has been passed down from generation to generation, and literally I had the privilege of listening to him tell the story. It is very good. I always will speak highly of Joseph Bruchac. I cannot wait to dive into more of his stuff, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I ended up reading is one that I'm not going to talk about a lot because I do want to do a deeper dive into this series as a whole. I have read most of this series already, but it was a couple years ago, and I know that it gets a lot of flack, and I get it, but I do want to do a deeper analysis of it, and that is the After series by Todd. So I literally have read the entire series before already, but I'm doing a reread because I do want to do a video on the intention versus the impact of the series. Everyone knows that they started off as, I think, One Direction fan fiction. I think that Arden is supposed to be Harry Styles, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then, you know, we have Tess who comes in, and Tess is young, naive, has kind of been sheltered her whole life, has been driven in one direction. And got that, driven in one direction. That was cute. She's been, you know, guided in going in certain directions by her mother. She's had the same boyfriend for an extremely long time, but when she gets to college, she meets Arden and his friends, and things kind of change up. Their relationship is extremely toxic. I think that most people know by reading this book or by reading reviews or hearing about it, there's a lot of back and forth. It's like every other chapter, they're together, then they're not. It's Arden, I love you. Arden, I can't stand you. Tessa, I can't be with you. Tessa, I need to be with you because I can't function. It's very emotionally draining to read this book because their relationship is so wrong. It is super wrong. And the thing about it is that I still to this day can't figure out if that was Anna Todd's intention to illustrate how unhealthy this relationship had become. And for a lot of different reasons, I feel like sometimes it's important to showcase that some relationships are just not healthy relationships. Some relationships are just toxic, and in a perfect world, every relationship that we enter would, you know, be smooth. It would be great, but that's not reality. Sometimes we get caught up with people that we should not be with. And I can see that potentially being the message of this book, but so many aspects of their relationship get romanticized that I'm still questioning it. Now, I do know for a fact, because I've already read the series, that the toxic behavior in this relationship does get addressed. But I think what I'm trying to determine is it still a little too late? Because people read this first book, and because the intentions of this possible showcasing of an unhealthy relationship are not made, it does feel like it's romanticizing it. So while I do know the conclusion, I still ended up giving this one 2 stars because it still was not a good book. But that's all I'm going to say about it for right now. I will talk a little bit more about it when I do end up finishing the rest of the series. The next book that I ended up reading was Small Spaces by Katherine Arden. This is the first book. I can't remember the name of the series, and I'm looking over here to see if I can... Oh, the series is called Small Spaces. So I have the other 2 checked out on audio from my library right now. So hopefully I will finish the series before the end of the year. The 3rd book, which is Dark Waters, just came out and talked about that in a vlog that I've recently done. But Small Spaces I read when it first came out. This is an art copy that I received of it a long time ago. And I absolutely adored it when I read it the first time. I adored it when I read it the second time. It is about a young girl by the name of Ollie, whose mother has passed away. She has a little bit of trouble fitting in, making friends, keeping friends, and her classmates end up going on this school trip to this farm. And there are some weird things that happen at this farm, some really, really creepy things, as you can see by the scarecrows. This book is extremely atmospheric. I think it's well written. I think there's a healthy balance of self-discovery and maintaining and building friendships, and Ollie kind of coming to terms with her grief and how she's really been feeling about losing her mom and not having her mom there with her. So if you're looking for a great middle grade series that is spooky and haunting, but does just a great job of also looking at some character development things, I definitely would recommend it. When I say this book is creepy, I genuinely do mean it's creepy. I absolutely love the fact that there are some individuals in here that truly just like make your skin crawl. And the first time I read this, I read it physically, and then the second time I listened to it on audio, and yeah, the audio was it added a certain flair to my read of it, and I still ended up leaving this one at a 5-star rating like I gave it the first time that I read it. Okay, so this next book that I'm about to show you is not a book that everybody is going to like if you do not like characters that have no redeemable qualities, I mean absolutely no one in this book has any redeemable qualities, I don't know if you would ever enjoy this book, because it is easy to dislike every single person in this book and walk out of this book and be like, they all were crappy people, because, you know, quite honestly, they really were all crappy people. And the book that I'm talking about is The Hunting Wives by Cobb. So I got this as a book of the month selection, and I decided to get the audio from my library, and I was listening to it. I was like, I don't really know what this is about. I don't know if this is something that I'm really going to enjoy. I kind of briefly remember the synopsis about the fact that it was this woman by the name of Sophie who ended up taking her family to Chicago, to the small town in Texas, because she wanted a change of pace. She was going to refocus her energy on her blog, and her husband was down for the move, so it was her husband, and her son. And when she gets there, she becomes obsessed, like disgustingly obsessed with this woman named Margot. And Margot has these group of friends, and they are called the Hunting Wives, so they call themselves the Hunting Wives, because every now and then they will go out and they'll go shoot in a clearing. Okay, it's stupid. It's really, really stupid. They go out and they shoot in a clearing, and they do a lot of other grotesque and horrible things that I just am like, you gotta be kidding me. Are you seriously that bored with your life that you have to do these horrible things? And literally Sophie becomes so obsessed that she starts really neglecting her husband and her son. She's more so about being with these women and being with Margot and creating this relationship with Margot, that she just stops really paying attention to them, just out partying all the time and just doesn't really care. It gets weird when a teenage girl ends up in the same clearing that they shoot in and she's dead. And then you're like, alrighty, so like, who killed her? And what's really strange about this whole thing is that, one, this is the spiciest domestic thriller that I've ever read. It was some spice in here, and it's not in the way that you think. I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised by the spice, especially as a romance reader. I was like, okay, I see, we got a little something going on here. It's not who you think it is. I had I had three suspects in this book. Three suspects. Not a near one of them was a killer. And I was like, what? I literally was sitting at my desk finishing up this audiobook, and I was like, what? I would have never seen that coming. When you get the reveal of who the killer is, you're like, it comes from left field. You're like, really? But it makes sense when the individual starts explaining, that last, like, that standing monologue where they feel like they need to explain why they did what they did. But so it was wild. If you like drama, you like messiness, you like reading about housewives who have absolutely nothing better to do with their lives than to sit around and drink, go to the pool, go to the lake, party, go shoot guns, have sex with random people. If you like the messiness, you're gonna like this book. If you don't like the drama and the messiness, you will not be able to make it through this book, because you're gonna look at these characters like, none of you has a redeemable quality about you. You're all horrible humans. And they are. I will not sit here and lie and say that not every single character outside of Sophie's husband and her son, every character in this book is horrible. Every single one of them. They're not likable. You won't walk away feeling empathy or sympathy for not a single person in this book, because it is what it is. And for some of them, you'd be like, you had it coming to you. Rightfully deserved for how some of them end up by the end of this book. But to be honest with you, I did enjoy it. I gave it 4 stars, and I'm looking forward to what Cobb is going to put out in the future. So the next book that I ended up reading, I think I'm going to save the picture books and the graphic novels and the comics to the end. The next book that I ended up reading was a nonfiction book, and it was Bad Fat Black Girl by Sesali Bowen. And I talked about this one a lot in the vlog that I did, so I'm not going to, kind of redo what I said before, but I do want to say that this is going to be definitely in my top books of 2021. It is looking at feminism not only from the perspective of Black women or Black femmes, but from the lens of those who grow up in the hood, and it's written in alignment with trap music. I listen to trap music. I have grown up listening to trap music. I don't know how to explain to you what trap music is, except that it's a subgenre of hip hop, and it is really heavily focused on trap life. If you don't know what trap life is, Google a trap house and you go from there. So she was talking about a lot of songs, a lot of artists that I was really, really familiar with. I think that she covered a plethora of different topics, and a lot of topics that people are not going to necessarily agree with her on, but I liked seeing it from her perspective. She talks about sex work, the difference between sex work and sex trafficking, being Black and queer, you know, being Black and fat and a femme or a woman, and how social media, just like this whole wave of the slim thick era, how it just, it's aggravating. And I say that as a bigger Black woman, that it's the most aggravating thing in the world. It's super frustrating, but that's a whole story for a different day. She talks about the relationship between Black femmes, Black women, and Black men, and how difficult sometimes those relationships can be, which I definitely can relate to. I think that there's a lot to be said about the relationship that exists between Black men and Black women right now, and how much history has played into that relationship. And it just, basically, at the end of the day, I resonated with a lot of stuff that she talked about in this book. And this book was not written for me. Ironically, this book was a love letter to Black women who have grown up in the hood, to empower them to say who you are, coming from the hood, who you've been and who you remain. There's nothing wrong with that. And there are a lot of people who will go into the hood and try to tell these women, you know, you need to change and do this. And people from the Black community as well, tell them you need to change this or you need to change that, and you need to, you know, carry yourself a certain way that is more acceptable by society. And in some ways, it is a little bit of internalized racism, because you're asking people to conform to the white gaze. And I like that this book was not about Black women going through self-actualization. And I say that as a Black woman who had to go through self-actualization. And what I mean by that is, these are Black people, when you go through a process of self-actualization, these are Black people who have to become actively aware and actively learn to embrace their Blackness, because society has told them not to. You've been conditioned to believe that your Blackness is a problem. Your Blackness is not something that you should be proud of. So you have to break down all of what you've been taught and relearn what it truly means to be Black. This is not for people like me. This is for people who are already comfortable with their Blackness. Not that I'm not right now. What I mean by that is, these people have never, or these individuals have never had to go through self-actualization, because they've been taught to be comfortable in their Blackness their entire life. They never had to do something where they appeal to the white gaze. They never had to worry about code switching or anything like that, because it's not the environment that they grew up in. And I really appreciated Sesali Bowen saying at the end that there are enough narratives out there about what the experience of being Black has been for Black women, Black femmes like me. What about Black women and Black femmes that come from the hood and don't have the same experiences as me? Because quite often they're the ones that are left out of the conversation, even when we talk about how feminism often leaves out Black femmes and Black women, and, you know, how they need to be included in the narrative, and how certain things that impact our community are things that the feminist movement needs to be advocating for. Well, even in having that discussion, we often leave out Black femmes and Black women who are from the hood, because we tell them that being from the hood is not who they should be. And so one of the best books, y'all, that I have read Oh gosh, it was so good. 5-star read. Like I said, one of my favorites of 2021, maybe one of my favorites of all time. To be honest with you, I definitely want to get a physical copy of it because I listened to this copy. I listened to it, not this copy. I listened to my read of it this time via audio through the library. So I do want to get a physical copy and read it again. There's just one book that I feel like you can continue to learn from over and over and over and over again. The next book that I ended up listening to was Room to Dream, which is another one that I ended up listening to via, not Libby, but I think I listened to this via Hoopla. So as y'all know, I am a proud supporter and absolutely love Kelly Yang. This is the 3rd book in her Front Desk series. The first 2 books are Front Desk and 3 Keys, and I'm not sure if this is going to be the conclusion to the series or not. I could potentially see her doing more, but this is the latest one in the series thus far. It released in September of this year, and I was really looking forward to it. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I gave the first 2 5 stars. I think this is my 4th book by Kelly Yang, and the first 3 I've read by her I've given 5 stars. I gave this one 4 stars because there was a little too much going on in this one. So it picks up kind of where we leave off in the 2nd book, 3 Keys. We are back where we're focusing on Mia, and because the 2nd book really heavily focused on Lupe and some things that she was dealing with her family and deportation, this one goes back to focusing on Mia, and Lupe is taking courses at the high school. So there's some conversation about like Mia and Lupe's relationship, like their friendship really working. I think that Mia struggled with this a little bit. She does get the opportunity to go back to China to visit her family, and while there she notices how much China has changed, and also some things that have stayed the same that she has learned not okay, like colorism, racism, sexism. A lot of that stuff is still very prevalent, and she didn't really realize it until she had spent some time learning some things in America and goes back to China, and it's like, wow, there are some issues here too. So she's also trying to work on her journalism career, which is heavily influenced by Kelly Yang's own kind of journey into journalism, where she's able to write for this paper in China, and she continues to do that when she comes back to the States. There's some issues with how Mia, releases stories without really getting consent. But then the story kind of shifts, where we find out that there is kind of a major hotel business that has moved into the same area, and they're taking business away from Mia and her family's hotel. And it kind of talks a little bit about how, major corporations often kind of crap on small businesses. So there, somebody trying to buy them out, and there's a whole lot of issues that ensue. I liked the writing. I love the characters. I love Mia. I think she's just so full of spirit, just positive spirit, and she's just an amazing kid. I like reading about her, and I think that Kelly Yang has such great writing ability. Everything that she writes is just so well done. It's beautifully done. However, I do think that she attempted to cover too many topics at one time. You have the conversation about what it's like being an immigrant and coming to America, and what it's like to go back to your home country and kind of see, issues. What is it like to, be Chinese and be Chinese American, and, big corporation versus small businesses. This conversation about consent, conversations about, being a thorough journalist, but also being a journalist that has integrity, conversations about friendship and maintaining friendship, and how changes when we get older. I just think that there was so much packed into a 350 odd page book that I was like, this is just too much for this one book. I think that prior to this book, she had carefully picked out certain topics that she wanted to hone in on, and she really focused the narratives on that specific topic. But in this one, it was like, we're just gonna throw as much stuff into this as we can, and then we won't spend a lot of time talking about each one, so then we run into the issue of everything not being fully developed. So honestly, that's what made it rather difficult to rate this one higher than 4 stars. I still think it's worth a read. I think the story or the series as a whole is absolutely amazing and worth checking out, but I definitely feel like this is probably the weakest of the 3. The next book that I ended up reading was For Your Own Good by Samantha Downing, and this is one that I know that Lala was doing for her book club, and I did not get the chance to read it for the book club, so I was like, I'm just gonna pick it up whenever my hold you know, comes through at the library, because it was a lot of people who were on hold for it. So finally my hold came through and I ended up listening to it, and I will say right now, For Your Own Good is not a thriller. It is more of a mystery, heavy on like character analysis, and it's one of those characters that you're gonna love to hate. He's an awful human too. I think that what's interesting about this is that you already know what's happening, you know who's responsible for everything, so there's no big dun 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 moment like a big reveal, because you already know. You literally just get the opportunity to be inside this man's head as he does this really effed up crap. So essentially what ends up happening is that you have this teacher who works at this prestigious school, and he feels like he is the best of the best, and that he challenges his students very, like a lot of mental health issues kind of going on there if you read it that way. He's very particular about certain things. He is not easy on his students at all. He's actually horrible to his students, I think, to a certain degree. He has an obsessive type of personality. As a matter of fact, if you've watched the TV show You, or you've read the book, it'll give you kind of that type of vibe where he feels like he knows best. He studies these people. He analyzes these people. He's obsessed with these people. So it's extremely strange. It's extremely strange reading this book, to be quite honest with you, because it's like this man has issues, and you do get some other perspectives of other people. And for a little while, you do get confused on like who's actually killing these people, because there's people who just end up dropping off like flies. And what I did like that Samantha Downing did is that like sometimes you were getting like perspectives of people who ended up dead, like they were giving, you know, you were getting their perspectives, and all of a sudden they just wound up dead. So it's starting to make you question like, all right, like, is it who I think it is? Because clearly there's this pattern going on here, but you can't be sure. But by the time everything works out to the end, you do kind of figure it out. There's a perspective from the student who kind of is catching on to what's going on. So it's not your typical thriller. It's not a thriller at all, I don't think. I think, like I said, I think it's definitely more of like a mystery. And I think, yeah, this is the first time I've ever read Samantha Downing, so the writing wasn't bad. I just don't think I really enjoyed the story as a whole. There were some parts of it that were intriguing, and this is just a hard book to describe, to be honest with you. It's like a psychopathic teacher who just can't get a grip on reality. That's really what it is. And so you get to trip out in his head as he's going through all this stuff, and you're like, oh my gosh, you're really like off your rocker. And it's true, he's completely off his rocker. But overall, it was a decent read. I don't know if I'm like 100% like invested in picking up another Samantha Downing book, but I did end up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. After that, I ended up reading Monday's Not Coming by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is my, oh Jesus, like my 4th or 5th Tiffany D. Jackson book, something along those lines. I think there's only a couple of her books that I actually have not read at this point, and this one was so sad. I had put that I was reading this on Instagram, and people were DMing me like, oh, this book tore me apart. And it did. It tore me apart. It was super sad. It made me feel just miserable, y'all. And as you can see, I really annotated it top and bottom. It's about a young girl by the name of Claudia whose best friend Monday goes missing, and it appears that no one seems to care that Monday has gone missing except Claudia. Monday doesn't come to school. She hasn't seen Monday all summer, and she keeps trying to tell people like something is not right with Monday not being here. Somebody needs to check on her. I've gone to her mother's house. Her mother has been completely just rude about it. I've tried talking to her sister April. I have not seen her other siblings. It is so sad because I found out later on that I believe that Tiffany D. Jackson got her inspiration for this book from Black girls that had gone missing, I think in the DC area. I think it's the DC area. It's either Detroit or DC, one of the two. And this is something that still happens today. I've actually seen this happen in my own city, where my own police department got called out for the response that they had for a white girl that had gone missing in comparison to a Black girl that had gone missing, and they got called out for it. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that has happened and has stopped. It is something that continues to happen because there's not as much time and investment and care that goes into Black children, specifically Black girls, Black young women that go missing. And this is not an easy read. This was really hard for me. I did a blended read of this, so I owned a physical copy and then I checked out the audio from the library. I don't really know how to explain what this experience will be like for anyone. I will tell you that it is a hard experience. You feel for Claudia as she tries to adjust to the possibility that Monday is missing. Monday doesn't want to be friends with her. The twist that comes at the end of this book is just super hard to come to grips with, and it's what makes this book so difficult to read. Tiffany D. Jackson does something very interesting with the concept of time. It's told in a couple different parts, where there's the before, a year before the before, 2 years before the before. There are parts where it's told like you'll have the heading of like be the month of the year, and all of that happens for a reason. I think that this is one of those books that you can't just read once and get it. I think you have to read it a couple of times, because once you know how she plays with time and the big reveal, then I think that the book just ends up being even more sad, but it also ends up making a lot more sense. I love this. I love this. This was not an easy read for me, but I did end up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I ended up reading was Aaliyah, or the title of the book is Baby Girl, better known as Aaliyah. And this is a non-fiction biography. I was going to say autobiography, but not autobiography. It's biography written by Kathy and Iandoli. And we talked about this one a couple of nights ago when we did live sprints. Bree and I did live sprints on the channel. And this really heavily discusses basically Aaliyah's life. So I will go into this by saying, like, if you're a huge fan of Aaliyah, you probably won't get much out of this book because you already know so much. If you're not a big fan of Aaliyah, then you probably will learn a whole lot. For me, it's not that I don't like Aaliyah. I've grown up listening to her music, but she died when I was around 9, and she passed a few weeks before September 11th. So in terms of what was happening that year, I remember September 11th more than her passing because I was so young. So I knew that she had passed away in a plane crash. I knew a little bit about the music that she had made. I knew that she had been in a couple of movies. I knew that, you know, like R. Kelly had produced her first album. I knew about the controversy between her and R. Kelly, but there were a lot of chunks and pieces of this entire narrative that I was missing. So stuff about like her life, stuff about her relationship with R. Kelly and how that messed up her entire career, which is unfortunate because in that situation she is the victim and he got away scot-free and she had to take some time away and rebuild her brand. I did not know that her uncle was a little bit on the shiesty side. I had no idea about how the relationship developed between her, Timbaland, and Missy Elliott. I did not know that she was close friends with Lil' Kim. I did not know the details of what happened right before she passed away, like literally moments before she got on the plane. And those were things that really ended up putting me into a slight reading slump going into November, because this book was so hard to read and it was so hard to really grasp. There's a lot of things that I think a lot of people are not going to like about this book. I think that it does include a lot of information about, you know, the industry in terms of like record sales and numbers, kind of like statistical information, just background information about the recording company Blackgrounds, which is owned by Aaliyah's uncle. And people may find that to be a little bit on the dry side. I personally did not like that the author opened up this book talking about R. Kelly. I think that there is some questionable motive behind doing something like that, when if it was told in a linear fashion, that we still would have gotten a glimpse of how the relationship that Aaliyah had with R. Kelly, you know, or not even, it just, what should have been a strictly business relationship, and the grooming that he did to her, that still would have had to fit somewhere into the narrative. But I don't like that literally that's what we opened up with, because she's definitely an artist and a human that's beyond that experience, and she was really faulted a lot for that. And it just shows, it paints a bigger picture to a much bigger narrative about how Black girls and women are treated in situations where they're sexually assaulted, sexually abused, raped, and groomed, and how the blame is placed on them because Black women and girls are hypersexualized, and, you know, her having to rebuild. But I think that the author also didn't give her the opportunity to just be Aaliyah and not the Aaliyah due to whatever controversies are happening right now with the R. Kelly cases. So I didn't particularly like that, but I did like that I learned more about her as a person, and just, you know, the kind of personality and spirit that she had. And, you know, there's definitely conversation that deserves to be had about her, you know, requesting permission from the family to write this biography, you know, public figure or not, and what legacy are, you know, her parents trying to protect, theirs or hers or both. So it's a lot of discussion. I think that this is going to be an access point for a lot of people who may just be stepping into Aaliyah's music and wanting to know more about her. This is nothing that the author did on her own per se. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the information that she includes in this book is readily available online. It's based off of interviews and things that she has watched that you can, you know, access on your own. And the rest of the book is really about fan letters to her, to Aaliyah, and pictures of Aaliyah. So it's not really a long book. The audiobook wasn't long, and then the last bit of the audiobook is really like nothing, because it's kind of fillerish a little bit. But overall, it was one that I did enjoy reading, so I did end up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the comics, manga, graphic novels, and picture books that I read. I always save these for the end. I believe I picked up this habit from Izzy over at Happy for Now, because I know that she does this as well. So the first picture book that I ended up reading was, I'm looking because this title is long, it's Classified. The full title the full title is Classified: The Secret Career of Mary Golda Ross, Cherokee Aerospace Engineer. I would have never remembered that title. So I think that this one, I picked this one up because I'm always interested in children's literature that is focused on Native American Indigenous experiences. And this was a nonfiction one that I believe came out last year or earlier this year, one of the two. And I was interested because Mary Golda Ross was responsible for also helping NASA get themselves situated. And, you know, I, of course, and like so many people, have heard so much about the Hidden Figures, where we learn more about Black women who contributed to aerospace engineering. But to hear more about a member of the Cherokee Nation who was such a huge asset to aerospace engineering I was like, oh, this is going to be good. I even looked up to see if, you know, like if she knew, if they happened to know each other by chance. But of course they didn't, because they were working in completely different states. But unfortunately, this nonfiction picture book did not hit. So this really read like a fact book, and the way that the author constructed it was that it was showing how Mary was kind of functioning her life based off of Cherokee values, but it ends up being super cut and dry. So you don't really get to know about Mary as a person or really connect with her as a person. She just ends up being this figure who's accomplished X, Y, and Z. So she just becomes a person of her accomplishments, which is great. You want to know those things, but you also want to know the person. So the text reads very dry, very textbook, which is something that you try not to do with children's nonfiction. You try to draw them into the narrative and make it really interesting. And for that, I think that the author kind of missed out on that. So I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. I also ended up reading another picture book, looking for a Jumbie by Tracy Baptiste. This is illustrated by Amber Wren. And this one is good because it reminded me of that same cadence, almost the same cadence as we're going on a bear hunt, except we're looking for a Jumbie, we're going to find a scary one. So almost kind of like that same cadence, but it focuses, of course, on Jumbies. I have read the first two books in the Jumbies trilogy by Tracy Baptiste. So of course, when I found out that there was, you know, a picture book coming out about Jumbies, I had to pick it up. The artwork in this is really nice. It's really simplistic. I think that this is going to be a good read aloud for parents and little ones. I don't know if this is one that I would use during story time, because it's a little bit lengthy in terms of text, maybe for an older story time. But I like that each time that they go and they're looking for a Jumbie, you know, readers get to meet a new Jumbie and you learn more about what that Jumbie is known for. Overall, I thought that this was a really great picture book. Ended up giving that one 4 out of 5 stars. I also read another Native Indigenous picture book, and it is I Sing You Down from the Stars by Tasha Spillet-Sumner. I ended up reading this one because I was looking for Mikola Goads, like anything else that they had illustrated, and I had found out that they illustrated this one because they had illustrated We Are Water Protectors, and I was like, oh, the artwork in this is absolutely gorgeous, so I just wanted to see what else Mikola Goad had illustrated. So I picked this one up, and it was good. It is a story that can be used universally. I talked about this in my Native American Indigenous recommendations video, so I'm not going to talk too much about it, but it is a universal, you know, ode and appreciation to little ones who come to families and them being bundles of joy, and the different traditions that are passed down to our little ones. Of course, these traditions that you see in this book are very indicative of cultural traditions that belong to the author, but I think that this is one that anybody can enjoy, which is why I really just thought that not only are you learning more about someone else's cultural traditions, but I think you just get this universal appreciation that anybody can really, you know, love this book and really just, you know, pass it along to different family members or people who are expecting little ones. So I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I also read 2 children's graphic novels. The 2 children's graphic novels that I read were Nighlights and Hicotea, or Hicotea, depends on how you want to say it. I had heard a lot about these two, and I had them checked out from the library for a long time. I heard that the artwork in these were absolutely beautiful, and this is done by Lorena Alvarez. And look at this artwork. Okay, so the artwork in these are gorgeous. However, I did not like the stories that much. I gave these both 3 stars. Nighlights is about a young girl who can capture nightlights and draw them and recreate them and make them do these magical things and whatever. And then there's this creature that kind of comes along and tries to take advantage of that, a darker creature, but it just ends super abruptly. And the narrative was quite hard to follow, to be honest. It was not one that I enjoyed, but the artwork, y'all, the artwork is too soon for it. It is absolutely beautiful. So the same thing kind of happens in Hicotea, but I think I understood this one a little bit more because it definitely is a conversation about environmentalism and the impact that humans have on the environment. But also, once again, the storytelling wasn't as strong as I want it to be. We still follow the same character from the first book, but it's not a continuation of that first story. This is a completely different story, but the artwork, I'm trying to find a good panel. Yeah, the artwork in here is still just as beautiful as the first one. I actually think maybe I gave this one 3.5 stars because the story worked better in this one than in this one. It still was a little but like this one was the abruption and how hard it was to follow the narrative. It just made it a difficult read for me. And the last 2 things that I ended up reading this month were Food Wars Volume 9 and 10. I can't really tell you much about these because they are, you know, in the middle of the series. I'm still rereading these, trying to make it through the entire series. I highly doubt it's going to happen this year. I'm hoping that I can make this happen next year and that it will be, you know, something that I could finally mark off of my bucket list. But I can tell you that these 2 books do continue to cover the Fall Classic. Probably one of my favorite parts of the Fall Classic is when we meet the character Mimasaka, who is not as great of a human as the rest of the characters in this book, and he's not a good cook, but I did appreciate how he was incorporated into the text by Yuto Tsukuda. But the Fall Classic is one of my favorite story arcs of Food Wars. It may change because I haven't gotten to other story arcs. Well, I have gotten to other story arcs, but I think there's probably like 2 or 3 other story arcs that I haven't gotten to. But these 2 I enjoyed. 4 stars each. Actually ended up reading this one twice this year. I did not know that. Apparently I had read it earlier this year. I don't remember reading it. And then read volume 10. All right, y'all, so that's it. Those are all the books that I read in October. So I read quite a bit, higher page count than normal because I read some chunkers this month. Let me know in the comment box below what you have read this month. Don't forget that the link to book of the month and the code will be down in the description box below for you to check out. If you're looking for ways to support the channel or follow me on social media, all those links will be down in the description box below, and I'll be back with another video soon.